Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our Sky Tonight program. This is Seth Mayo again, curator of astronomy for the Loma Planetarium at MOAS. And in this edition, we're covering the dates of July 4th through July 10th. We're going to start things off by celebrating what's called aphelion, our farthest distance from the sun, that occurs this time of the year. Then we're going to celebrate Saturn, now visible in our evening sky before midnight starting this week. And we'll end with a look at the moon getting really close to a bright red giant star called Antares. So let's get to it. On Monday, July 4th, around the world, we're all celebrating a shared moment around the sun called aphelion or aphelion, depends on how you want to say it. So this is the time of the year when we're actually farthest from the sun, and that may seem confusing because if you're in the northern hemisphere, you're feeling the blaring effects of the sun since summer just began 2 weeks ago, and you'd think that would be closer to the sun. But as we've explained recently, the seasons are due to Earth's tilt at about 23.5 degrees. In the northern hemisphere right now, we're tilted towards the sun, which means we're getting more energy, more direct energy from our sun, which warms our temperatures. Of course, that's opposite for the southern hemisphere. But 2 weeks after the summer solstice, as we call it, that is when we're farthest from the sun. And it turns out this year, it's on July 4th. So aphelion or aphelion originally comes from two Greek words, apo, which is Greek for far away, and helion has its roots in the word helios, which is the Greek word for the sun. Actually, the word used to be aphelium or aphelium, with the word helium in it, because the word helium, as we know, represents an element, the second on the periodic table. Helium was actually first discovered by looking at the sun and doing something called spectroscopy, where you could figure out the chemical makeup of something by the light it either absorbs or re-emits. And that was first discovered on the sun before we discovered helium naturally here on Earth. But anyway, that word eventually was turned to aphelion or aphelion that we use today, which now refers to a time when we're farthest from the sun in our orbit. Since our orbit around the sun is not perfectly circular, as you may know, it's oval shaped. It's what we call an ellipse. It's an elliptical orbit. Sometimes we're farther from the sun, sometimes we're closer to it. And it just so happens right now, we're about 1.5 million miles farther from the sun than our average distance of about 93 million miles. On this date, we're about 94.5 million miles from the sun. So that sounds like a lot, but for the entire orbit of Earth around the sun, that's only about a 3% difference between nearest and farthest approach. The closest we are to the sun, called perihelion, para means close in Greek, and again, helion is for the sun, happens 2 weeks after the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. So again, opposite of what you would naturally think. And even though in the northern hemisphere we are farther from the sun at this time of year, it's actually a bit warmer, generally so in the northern hemisphere during its summer, than the southern hemisphere gets during the summer, even though we are farther from the sun. And that is most likely due to more of the land masses on Earth are in the northern hemisphere, and land can absorb and re-emit heat from the sun much more quickly than the oceans do, which predominantly cover the southern hemisphere part of our planet. And what's also interesting is that our summer in the northern hemisphere is a little bit longer than our winter, and that's because at aphelion we're farther from the sun, which means we feel a little bit less of the sun's gravity, and that pulls us just a little bit slower. So our summer is a couple days longer than our winter time, but that's not really noticeable when you look at the entire calendar. So we're just a little bit farther away from the sun at this time of year, even though it's getting warmer for our summer solstice, which also means that the sun is just a little bit smaller than on average, but again, something that you wouldn't notice quite a bit. So we can celebrate aphelion or aphelion occurring here on July 4th. As we get further into this week and you look towards the east or southeast, around 11 o'clock you may start seeing the planet Saturn rise high enough for us to see above the horizon there. And that's great. So right now we have a better and better view of Saturn as it moves into our evening sky. And I want to mention it because it's been visible in our morning sky with all those other planets, but it's nice to be able to see this before it's too late or too early in the morning. And right now, Saturn is not super bright, at least according to Stellarium here, it says it's magnitude 0.5, and that's not extremely bright, especially for a planet. It's going to look like a brighter star that doesn't twinkle in the sky. The good news is that Saturn is among a very dim region of our sky. And what I mean by that is that there are not a lot of bright stars in this area. At the moment, Saturn is inside the constellation called Capricorn, the Sea Goat, and not far also from the constellation of Aquarius. Of course, two signs of the zodiac. And this area is known as the ocean or the sea of the sky. There's a lot of water-related constellations here, and there's actually not a lot of bright stars. So that ocean idea, a very dark area, kind of works. So that means that Saturn will pretty much stand out in this area, even though it's not the brightest planet. But if you do find it, it's going to look like a star that doesn't twinkle. And I always talk about Saturn, especially if you have a telescope, because if you have a chance to see it, it's so amazing to see Saturn with your own eyes, especially those beautiful rings. And maybe a moon or two around it is also very special. Saturn has the most discovered moons in the solar system with the current count of 82, which always amazes me. But as we zoom out, one thing to note is that Saturn is not as bright as it gets because we're kind of far away from it. At the moment, we're a little over 9 astronomical units away from Saturn, which is just less than 850 million miles away. That's a huge distance. But the good news is we're actually getting closer and closer to it in our orbit. We're actually catching up to Saturn in its orbit, even though we're far away from it, which means it's getting closer in our sky and nearing what's called opposition, when Saturn is opposite of the sun in the sky, when it can be seen from sunset to sunrise, which means all night long. That's when we're closest to it, and that occurs on August 14th, so later this summer. So we're seeing Saturn get brighter and brighter, a little bit bigger and bigger, especially through a telescope, and we can see it earlier and earlier, which bodes well for finding this planet in the sky. By the end of this week, on Sunday, July 10th, we have the moon in its waxing gibbous phase, when it's quite large in the sky, nearing a full moon. Not long after, getting fairly close to a bright summer star that we've talked about before, and that's the star at the heart of the scorpion called Scorpius here in the southeastern part of the sky in the evening. And this star is called Antares, which you find right there. And you can find the moon and Antares pretty close on this evening, on Sunday evening, the 10th. Now here in Stellarium, we do have the moon a little bit exaggerated to show it to you a little bit better here, but I'll turn off the exaggerated version of the moon so you can get the true angular separation between the moon and the star Antares. So they're still really close, even with a more realistic size of the moon, which is quite nice. And this star works well as the heart of the scorpion because it is red, a red supergiant. Kind of makes sense for a red heart. And the name Antares is interesting since there's been some speculation for quite some time that the name is Greek for rival to Ares. And Ares is the Greek name for the planet Mars. Mars is the Roman name that we use for the planet. So this could be rival to Ares or rival to Mars. And the idea behind that is because sometimes Mars can be in this area of the sky, since this is near what's called the ecliptic. That's the plane of our solar system. And that means the planets travel near this line or pretty close to it. And so at some time, depending on where Mars is in its orbit, Mars can pass by. And since Antares is a red supergiant and Mars is a red planet, they look sort of similar, and it'd be easy to confuse the two. So this star could rival the appearance of Mars, since Antares is a very bright star. But that's just speculation. We don't actually know if that's entirely true. If you go back to ancient Mesopotamia, where a lot of these Greek traditions and names and characters came from, the name may originally just meant heart of the scorpion. And many names are Arabic, and the Arabic translation of this name may relate to the name of a famous warrior and hero from Arabic tradition. So it may not actually have to do with Mars, but that's kind of an interesting idea, and Antares does have the name Ares in it, so it kind of makes sense. Either way is a famous red giant, one of the largest you can find in the sky. This is called a supergiant star, about 12 times the mass of our sun, and could be, amazingly, 600 to 700 times the size of the sun. If you placed it where our sun is in our solar system, Antares could potentially expand out beyond Mercury, Venus, Earth, and even Mars, which is so huge. But we're not entirely sure. It's kind of hard to tell, because very large stars can have a very tenuous atmosphere that's very thin, and it's hard to gauge the extent of that atmosphere and where it actually goes to. And it also doesn't help that its distance that we've measured to the star is quite uncertain. It's around 550 light years away. That means the light from the star takes somewhere around 550 years. That could vary by 100 light years on either side of 550, so it's kind of tough, but it is still considered a star that's decently far away, and a type of star that's so large that could explode in a supernova, maybe in the next 10,000 years. It's one of the best imaged stars in our sky. I think because it's so bright and so large, that enables scientists to really be able to study it with telescopes, especially the very large telescopes in Chile in South America, operated by the European Southern Observatory. They provided the most detailed image of a star ever, and it happens to be of Antares. And here is a picture from those telescopes. And even though it's a little fuzzy, this is amazing to have a picture this good of a star. They're quite difficult to image because of their distances away. And this allowed us to construct a video of it. And what we found was really interesting turbulent areas inside the atmosphere of Antares that we're trying to learn more about. So really fascinating star in our summer sky that's very bright. Its deep red color is very noticeable, marking the brightest star and the heart of Scorpius, the scorpion, in that southern area of the sky that we talk a lot about this time of year. And it helps to have the moon nearby, especially on the 10th of July. Just for reference, so you definitely know you're looking at Antares as the waxing gibbous moon flies by it in its orbit around the Earth. Well, look at that. You made it through another episode of our Sky Tonight program. As always, we really appreciate your support and for tuning in to this program. And if you ever make it to Daytona Beach, definitely stop by the Museum of Arts and Sciences and check out a show in our Lohman Planetarium. We're running shows daily. And if you want any more information about our shows or anything else going on at the museum, please check out our website and tune into our other social media channels. We're posting all this great content from the museum. So we hope to see you back here again. Take care. And of course, happy stargazing.